storytelling component was central, and I am really taken by, and perhaps you will be too, or maybe you already are, Todd's multifaceted approach to interweaving his music and his life outside of music. And so before we start fielding questions, I'm going to let him talk a little bit about this tune and the body of work that it comes from, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, first off, folks, it's wonderful to be here with you, and special thanks to Noah for inviting us to be a part, and to just the beautiful series. I remember the first time that I got invited to do well, we were doing a concert, and it was in a format, it was at a college, and the professor said, well, we don't want you to just do a concert, we want you to play a piece of music and then stop and talk about it. I said, I don't know. And we like doing our thing, we got a way we like to go about it, and but it ended up being this kind of exact same format, and it was one of the best shows we ever did, because it allowed for this back and forth and this learning and talking and sharing about the music. So I appreciate that you cultivate that way and foster more understanding about what we're doing and what's the motivation. And so tying that into the piece of music we just did, it's off my most recent album called On These Streets. And that is my effort as a 20-plus year resident in Baltimore of a neighborhood called Sandtown, Winchester, to do a musical portrait of my neighborhood. Our neighborhood, you may not have heard of Sandtown, Winchester, but you probably heard the name of one of our residents, Freddie Gray, who died tragically in 2015 while in police custody, and was part of so many cases where we have increased scrutiny and attention and discussion and discourse about the discrepancies of white and black life in our country, and how folks are approached in different settings, and so, you know, in Baltimore we had, after his death, after the funeral, we ended up having some unrest, and as media is prone to do, it focused on all the negatives. We had an intersection in our neighborhood at Pennsylvania Avenue and Pressman Street. For anyone that was tuning in, the national news was fixated on that because there was a CVS that got set on fire. And so, you know, we were dealing with the challenges, the struggles of that in 2015. And amidst all that negative, I felt, okay, this is a part of our challenge, our community's challenge. But I felt as someone that has lived in the neighborhood 20-plus years, I had an opportunity as an artist to give a balanced portrait. And one of the things that attracted me to the neighborhood when I got involved years ago as a volunteer at a chapter of Habitat for Humanity was that I started experiencing all these beautiful things in the neighborhood, of the community. We have, there's a beautiful sense of community, of folks knowing each other, caring for each other, looking out for each other, that I had not experienced growing up in northern Jersey and the suburbs. And then there, you know, we have a lot of just like you might probably know that Baltimore, our architecture is the row homes, right? You know, anyone thinks about Baltimore as these beautiful row homes. We still have that present. We have a stillness at night. People think, how many people here associate Baltimore City with The Wire, the TV show The Wire, right? Yeah. So, you know, folks think that we're just constantly living in a war zone. And, you know, I felt this album was a chance to get past the stereotypes as someone that's lived in the neighborhood 20-plus years now, to do music that captured our struggles, but also our positives as well, and our assets as well. And so that first composition is called On the Corner, and it tries to capture just the, on Pennsylvania Avenue, this historic thoroughfare in our neighborhood, which was, it was like the Harlem of Baltimore. You know, the Royal Theater, where it was the equivalent of the Apollo Theater in New York. And you know, the great musician Gary Bartz, a saxophonist, he was from my neighborhood, and he wrote the liner notes for the album, and he talks about how, you know, Pennsylvania Avenue, it's almost like I think about when I visit my family in Egypt. My dad's from Egypt, and you have these markets where, you know, it seems like you go into a shop, you get that in New York too, I don't know if that's the Connecticut vibe so much, but you go into the shop and you like everything you can think of. It's not just like a cold drink. You got batteries and like furniture and everything. And you know, it's the same kind of vibe, Pennsylvania Avenue. You may go into a spot, you know, you get lured by the CDs on the front, the DVDs, and you go in and one of my favorite ones was a couple of years ago. I was at this little corner store to get an ice cream, and a guy came in and he said, "Yeah, you have that Viagra?" And the guy said, yeah, here it is. It's like, he told him the price. And he's like, "No, I need that like 24-hour Viagra." So they didn't have that. But you know, it's you know, there's this vitality that, you know, like whether it's the bodega or a shop that I would see in Egypt with visiting my family. And sometimes, you know, look, we do have the reality of drug dealing on a lot of our corners. Right now, as the opioid epidemic is hitting all across our country, as has long been the case, that stuff gets funneled and marginalized in neighborhoods that are less able to fend for themselves. And our community, historically African American community, that after the death of Martin Luther King and the unrest then, and the end of integration, it ended the brutality of segregation, but all the majority of the professional black folks moved out of our community, and so now suddenly our neighborhood was depopulated, had the destruction of the riots in 1968, and less able to fend for itself. And so, you know, so we're seeing that kind of renewed of late with all the opioid stuff, and I see all these folks, you know, like I said, we're a historically African American neighborhood, and I see all these folks that clearly are not from our neighborhood, coming in, and so we struggle to, here we already kind of are down and fighting for ourselves, and then have this other influx of challenges. So that's all part of it. This composition tries to encapsulate that intent, the energy, the good energy, the bad energy, and you hear that in the bounce, the opening line, the three of us played together. And then, you know, you hear later on that kind of driving, boom, 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 while Eric is playing and drums, and it's just that duality of our neighborhood. And even when you look at, we've got of course, the albums here. When you look at the cover of the album, you'll see it was very intentional visually to have the duality. You see on the album cover, there's a marching band, because we still have marching bands in our neighborhood, and all the beautiful, like the majorettes, and the drum corps, and they got the vibrant green, yellow, and white uniforms. And then to the side, you see these looming vacant buildings, and so that duality is going on. So that's a little bit about that composition. And on the album, since as instrumentalists and doing instrumental music, it's hard. It's not like we have lyrics that, you know, can explicitly say what each song is about. A lot of these compositions have introductions where I have community members that are recorded talking about it. Like Pennsylvania Avenue, I talk about the history of that, and I have some of our community members that are talking about seeing Duke Ellington, Dizzy Gillespie, Stevie Wonder, James Brown at the Apollo Theater, and so there's that richness that in our neighborhood. Yeah, so it's, like I say, it's a chance, it's an opportunity to do a musical portrait. And for me, the other significance is that I got started on the whole jazz thing later on. It was, like I said, volunteering in our neighborhood at Sandtown Habitat for Humanity years ago, and I would come every Saturday. And one Saturday they didn't have any work for me, and this guy rolls up in a pickup truck and says, "I'll put you to work." And we went down to Pennsylvania Avenue, this building, and worked that day. And I said, "I'm here every Saturday, can I work with you?" And that began a relationship, a friendship. He's a lifelong community resident in the neighborhood, Elder C.W. Harris. He and his wife, Amelia Harris. Folks that stayed in the neighborhood when so many others had left. And, you know, worked with him, was studying political science at the time at college, not seeing a path for myself on that. So I left school, I moved into the neighborhood, and 20 plus years we've been working with our nonprofit Intersection of Change and dealing with addressing poverty-related needs in our community. We have a recovery program called Martha's Place, an arts program called Jubilee Arts, a farm that offers employment for folks coming back from incarceration called Strength to Love 2, and in the process have really reclaimed a couple major blocks of our neighborhood. So that's all the things, and that was a long-winded answer, wasn't it?
I'm going to make the executive decision. We're going to play one more, and then we will open it up to questions at that point. Is that cool with you, Todd?
Yeah.
Okay. You want to set this one up?
Yeah, that'd be good. You know, I talked about my dad being Egyptian, and he immigrated in his mid-20s. Met my mom, and you know, if you're one of those folks that says, "Oh, now I see," now you say it, now I see the Egyptian side in you. My brother got the Egyptian side. I got more of my mom's Pennsylvania looks. But you know, growing up in New Jersey, not being around Middle Eastern community, not speaking the language, because my dad didn't have anyone to speak Arabic to at home. You know, I definitely, as I've gotten older, I felt a certain, something missing or an inadequacy, like not even being able to talk to my grandmother because of the language barrier. But the last 10 years or so, for me, a way to connect with that part of my heritage and culture has been through music. And I asked my dad, can you give me some records that I can check out? And he gave me some by a great Egyptian vocalist named Abdel Halim Hafez, one of the titans like James Brown or Elvis of American music. And it's had a profound impact on my compositions as I work to blend Middle Eastern music and jazz. And this is one of those examples that's the result of that.
questions at this time for Todd especially, or for any of us? Jerry first and then you. Yes.
Kind of a combination question. How did you end up in Baltimore? How did you end up in music, jazz, and that instrument?
So I grew up in northern New Jersey. I went to Baltimore. I was going to school there at Loyola College and studying political science. And then, like I said, started volunteering to become a neighborhood. As far as the instrument choice, I grew up playing the clarinet, which we're going to introduce on this next song. And, it's interesting. When you play clarinet and you express interest in jazz, it's a weird kind of dynamic. There's this, because there's this whole repertoire and identity for the clarinet as a classical instrument. And you end up playing all these things like Mozart and Weber and everything. It's interesting, I had a chance to do play with Don Byron, the great clarinetist, several times, who's been just one of my main inspirations of showing what's possible in modern jazz on the instrument. And he talks about the same exact things. If anyone's ever interested, go to my YouTube channel. We got that on there, and you can hear him talking about it. So in my context, I expressed interest in jazz when I was in high school, and the band director turned me away. He said, well, you have to play the saxophone to play jazz. And so it wasn't until I got to Baltimore and going to school there, and it was a small little music program, and not for music majors and whatnot, but it was good because anyone was welcome. And so that was my first chance to start playing in some of this material. And I met a friend who then started giving me records to listen to, getting Charlie Parker and Miles and Coltrane. And then he gave me a gift of an Eric Dolphy record, who was a great flautist, saxophonist, and introduced the bass clarinet into jazz. And so that showed me like, oh boy, there's so much more possible. At the time, I was sounding like a bad Dixieland player on the clarinet. and I just heard the depth of this instrument. I mean, there are some people that, even if you think about saxophone, soprano saxophone, there are some people that focus just on soprano saxophone, but even if you think about like greats that we idolize like Coltrane would tend to use soprano in certain settings, but then he would go back to his tenor as that kind of fuller thing. And I feel for me at this point it's similar with my clarinet and bass clarinet. My bass clarinet is my primary, but as we'll hear in this next one, I still try to bring it in. And actually this next tune is going to factor in some of that early classical influence as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we had one here and then yes.
Well, mine's kind of been answered, but so that really is not a saxophone, but that is a bass clarinet?
Yeah, so usually I'll get people come up and say, what's that funny looking saxophone you got there? So it's a good thing there's this invisible force field that's preventing me from lunging at right here. Yeah, so it's a bass clarinet. And so it's the same fingering as clarinet, it's just one octave lower. And it's the same range-wise, everything, as again, the soprano saxophone and the tenor saxophone with their differences.
I've never seen this.
It's very unusual, and so that's where, for me, once I started going this, I mentioned this musician Eric Dolphy, and he was a guy that brought it into kind of mainstream jazz, but I noticed when I started trying to play faster tempos and in louder settings, it was really hard. And so I started looking to, let me look at Eric Dolphy and the master at work, and I would notice in those settings he would go over to his saxophone. It's a louder instrument. It's technically easier to play and execute. And so for a long time I thought it wasn't possible to do these things that I wanted to do. But I kept working at it, and I feel like I've been able to break through some of these challenges, and I think that's part of what makes it unique about the way that I'm presenting it in this kind of context.
And you have to wear a double strap with that? Because of the...
This is the only bass clarinet I ever bought. I lucked out when I went in '97 to a store and got my hands on this as a used instrument. It has the two hooks on there. Most of the bass clarinets I've been trying some recently, and they have just the one hook, which is comparable to the saxophone. But it's really, at this point, it's just like a weighting thing, a comfort thing.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we'll take so many questions. We're going to take one more for now, if that's okay, unless somebody needs to leave. And then we're going to play one more, and then we'll take more questions. So, yes, go ahead.
Your name's Eric? Did I pick that up?
Yeah.
I used to play the drums in high school.
Yeah.
It's been a long while, but I keep noticing when you hit your snare, I'm not hearing the snare, the sound of the snare. Is there a tambourine or something on your?
On the previous song, I did have a tambourine on.
Okay, I wasn't hallucinating.
No. You hear very well.
I kept hearing it. I was like, it doesn't sound like he has his snares on, but I keep hearing a tambourine. I was like, what kind of a snare does he have?
Yeah, it's called a snare tambourine. So snare, literally. So it's magnetic. And so play with your hands or sticks. Yeah.
That's very cool.
He's got a few different toys in there. You might hear something. One of his favorites is a triangle. And so,
I can see a little bit of
yeah, so you probably
can't
get.
spoil the element surprise.
Well, we did a recording recently too for a record that'll come out this fall, and we were in the studio and we're playing, and I like to start my solos, not leaving more space and everything. And then I hear like these wind chimes and a wood block, and it's disoriented, but it's beautiful alternate textures, and I mean he's such a musical guy and he uses all that.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So please keep track of your questions that we haven't answered yet. We intend to get to all of them. I want to take this. I think you'll enjoy it. Do you want to set it up, or do you want to talk about it after?
No, I think what you mentioned kind of is set up, and we'll go into it.
Do you want to talk about that tune a little bit before I resume the solicitation of questions? At least tell us what it is.
That's called Cantata. Or Cantata. And that's a song. I had it here somewhere. It's one that I wrote some time back, and people tend to like it, and so people say, "Oh, do you have that?" People always want to know, "Do you have that music recorded?" And then sometimes they say no, and be lying because they want to hear what it's recorded. So this just came in the mail 2 days ago, and it's the new album. It'll come out this fall, and it has Cantata on it. So yeah, so it's something that, like I said, it's got the classical influence. You can hear that, and it kind of tap into that lineage and that history of the clarinet and its identity. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so yes.
What influenced me coming here, looking at the flyer outside of the library, with some of your influences, arts, Baerman. What really intrigued me coming here was that you also were influenced by Bernie Moulton. And he's a reed instrument fanatic.
Mm-hmm.
He played with Herbie Hancock's Headhunters. He played everything from clarinet all the way down to bassoon. And he made a bassoon sound funky. I was going to say, why aren't there, besides a saxophone, why I stopped because someone broke into my parents' house and stole my cello and drove out. So, but I still never stopped loving music. But the lead instrument, like Bernie Molken, was the one that really brought me to attention, and I saw that was my influences. And what did you learn from, and being influenced by him?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned him because he is an important one as far as the lineage. I talked about Eric Dolphin. I saw you nodding at Eric Dolphin, so I knew I had an ally from there. And then you talk.
I forgot about Eric Dolphin.
Yeah, and now you talk about Benny Maupin and another one that. So Eric Dolphy was late 50s, early 60s, notable for his own body of work, which was very unique, ahead of his time. His collaborations with Charlie Mingus and with John Coltrane were two of his most prominent. And then Benny Maupin comes into the picture in late 60s when Miles Davis does the album Bitches Brew.
50 years ago this week.
Oh wow, okay. And so that's still one of those things that's like that kind of, when people listen to that album, they have this connection with Benny Maupin playing bass clarinet on that. And from there, you've got some people that play it until you get to Don Byron. You've got David Murray, who's actually down in Baltimore right now, playing some gigs tonight. But to me, Don Byron comes on the scene as really that person that starts saying, I'm playing clarinet and bass clarinet, and I'm going to show you what this instrument can do in a modern context. But going back to Benny Maupin, I went in 2005 to the one and only bass clarinet convention. Do we have any saxophone players in the house? Okay. And trumpet players. So, like every year they have the World Saxophone, International Saxophone Coalition meetings. They just had the International Clarinet Association session down in Tennessee. So we had the one and done bass clarinet convention in Rotterdam, Holland in 2005. Tangent about that is that, so I was excited. Another guy in Baltimore that plays the bass clarinet too, we went over there. And, it was exciting to be around kinfolk because there's so few of us, right? And so you have this kinship with anyone else that's doing it and showed what are possible. Now, when we got out there, though, they had one day where they wanted to break the Guinness Book of World Record for the most bass clarinets assembled in a bass clarinet choir. That was my limit. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. They had everybody wearing yellow T-shirts. It looked like a cult. It was like but it was beautiful. So Benny Maupin was at that as well, performing, and they had this old Gothic church, cathedral, and so we're seated down in these aisles, and you hear the sound of the low warble of the bass clarinet filling the echoes of the room, and then you can't see anything, and then the lights are all dim, candlelight only. It definitely felt like the cult meeting was continuing. And then here they come, Benny Maupin and another guy, and they're walking solemnly down the aisle, and it was like, this is crazy stuff. But probably 10 years later, he was in Washington D.C. and Eric and I went down to hear him. And coming back to some of the things you observed, he was playing his bass clarinet, his flute, his tenor saxophone, his soprano saxophone, and some piano. And the thing is that his composition and his writing is so beautiful, like these textures and grooves. So I love his playing, his music, and something that I try to do is connect with these other people that are significant. So a highlight for me was in 2012 when I brought him to Baltimore as a guest with my 9-piece jazz orchestra. And we did a concert, to work with him, to have worked with Don Byron. To me, that's very important because of this lineage that I feel that I'm part of. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Benny Maupin.
Yes, Rich. Have you experimented with contralto at all?
I have not. This has been good for me as far as the depth that I want to go. You start getting those others. And I think it's intriguing, definitely, but I think then you run further into that challenge. You're going to play in this setting of being heard because it's such a low range that it very can easily get buried by piano, bass, and drums that are going on. And interestingly, you know, you get some of these instruments, mine on the low notes, and you get into that contralto range. If you sit in front of your desktop computer and play those low notes and look at the screen, it causes an interference. It's like for those fans of The Matrix, when Neo comes out of the Matrix and he's still controlling the scene. It's crazy. So like, you know, like the correlation between physics and sound waves and electronics. So that's a total tangent, but that's
You read Downbeat at all?
Yeah.
This month's article, I just happened to catch the article this morning, great article on listening to jazz and the aspects of it. Interesting, all the interplay between the instruments.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, and that's such a huge part, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, Eric and I have worked together for so many years, and there's a rapport. It's like a relationship. When if you're playing music, you have this conversation going on. Even Noah and Henry, you know, the four of us all playing together for the first time. When musicians are good and listening to each other, is that interplay. And when you're a listener and you start listening and appreciating that, and that's why jazz is so beautiful. Is like it's so rewarding. The more you get into it, the more, you know, you can hear stuff that we're doing tonight and appreciate it. But then you go and listen more. You come see us again or whatever, and you start getting tuned in. And like there's other things you pick up on you didn't hear the first time. And so that's one of the joys of this music, I think.
We'll take one more back there before we play the next one. Yes.
Hi. I just wondered, what do you listen to other than jazz? Like, it seems like you know a lot about music, and maybe there's other genres or even musicians that interest you. I just wondered.
I'm a big Megadeth fan. I don't know. We got Megadeth, Benny Maupin and Megadeth. We need to have a talk after this. That's funny. For me, growing up, classical music was what was playing in the house. My dad, he loved classical music, and so he had this record collection. It would always be on. Even if it was just in the background, you had the classical music station on. My mom grew up playing piano and organ in church, and so that would be part of, you know, what was going on in the house too. You know, I was not exposed, I think because like we didn't have cable TV, there wasn't, like they weren't playing popular music, so that wasn't stuff I was exposed to. At a certain point in high school, there was a radio station that would play Frank Sinatra every Friday, just like, and so that was an important thing. I fell in love with his music and the arrangements, you know, and then the jazz aspect of that. Certainly, as I have gotten into Middle Eastern music, that's been something that is a huge passion for me, and I've incorporated. But then other artists like Stevie Wonder, I'm a huge Stevie Wonder fan. And I find that even other styles of stuff that I'm not actively listening to, I always take inspiration from hearing other things, and invariably, for me it's very important to be out supporting other musicians, and invariably I'll go and hear somebody else, and then I'll get a seed of an idea that inspires me, and it becomes a composition element for myself too. So those are some other things.
Hey, Bill, can I add something quickly? So I just want to encourage people who may not be hip with Don Byron, that Todd was talking about Don Byron and how he showed what's possible to do with the clarinet and bass clarinet, you know, in today's realm. And he's got a gospel album. He did an album of klezmer influenced music, the music of
Honest, classical, hip hop, klezmer.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago we were talking. I said, man, you know, so what do you want to do next? I want to do a country western album. And here's a guy that does all that and does it well.
Yeah.
You know, true artist.
The most outrageous, and it's fun too, is he does a cover of a Jimi Hendrix tune in a medley with "Happy Together" by the Turtles. So go figure.
And that's something that Don loves doing. And like he would do this performance series at Symphony Space in New York, and he would have like some Ornette Coleman jazz tunes on the first half, and then he'd have Sly and Stone program in the second, and his part of it, kind of like in the spirit of this, like to bring people together across different groups. He said they would never come together, but to do that. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about jazz too, is it incorporates so many different elements. And You heard some of the Middle Eastern stuff that I throw into the mix, and the classical stuff, and we do Latin in there, and you know, even like the first tune, we had some rock elements, so it's beautiful music.
It's a good segue into this next tune.
Yeah. So the next composition is back in the Middle Eastern aspect. This is called Wahsouli, which is Arabic for my arrival. And I recorded it in a quartet setting and with my 9-piece jazz orchestra. Eric is on both of those albums, and they're in the back. But this is the one where it's called Wahsouli for a reason, which is that I felt that as I was making that experimentation with jazz and classical, jazz and Middle Eastern, this was where I finally felt like I was getting the two to blend. And it's tough because jazz is very much built on thick, rich harmony. Middle Eastern music is much more so on unison lines, or maybe you'll have a drone underneath. And so sometimes you try to put them together, and it's just like oil and water, and they don't really mix. So this was an effort where I felt like it's finally coming together, and this is what you do.
I'm conscious at this moment of the, so much of jazz is about tension and release. And I'm conscious right now of the tension between the fact that we would like to play all night and the fact that the library closed 20 minutes ago and being very gracious for letting us stay. So I will make one last sweep for questions if there are. Yes.
Can you get quarters on that?
Say again?
Can you get any quarters up? You were talking about Middle Eastern music, and I was just wondering, that is a,
Yeah, that's something that I have not figured that out. Sometimes I'll try to bend into that lip up or down into that. Otherwise, I've done some approximations of that. There are some folks that have done, like, there's a trumpet player named Amir El-Safar, an Iraqi American trumpeter that has done some wonderful work along those lines. There's a trumpeter named Ibrahim Malouf, who's half French, half Lebanese, and he's got a trumpet that's specially designed so he can play quarter tones. So there are folks that do it. I've kind of come up with my own little hybrid, but I'm not savvy enough to do the quarter tones.
I wanted to ask about your relationship between the two of you when you're composing. Like on that one, it started with like almost like a tantric kind of thing with the downbeat, keep going over and over again. And you've played together a lot, and I just want to ask about the relationship. When the drums come in and out, there's a lot of features, there's a lot of back and forth, and I want to ask about that, whether it's like, okay, you play it a bunch of times and then you record it, or you recorded it one way, and then over time, little pockets have come in for features or anything like that.
Well, over time, the music changes, because every day is different. So let's say you're touring and you're playing every single night. It shouldn't be the same every single night. So you'll hear something that someone has done and that inspires you. As musicians, you're always trying to listen to one another. Like Todd said earlier, this is the first time we're all playing collective, So I'm trying to listen to everyone. If I hear something that no one may play or everyone may play, I'll be inspired and encouraged by that. Sometimes there may be something in my mind that comes, well, I shouldn't say my mind, because really music comes through you. We don't really make it. We're conduits. So, and that's really true. It comes through you and you let it come out. So, but in the process, you're listening at the same time, and you try to be selfless, and you try to inspire as well. Something comes through. And so, I guess it's just a rapport. Like they play together a lot. And there's a rapport just from listening, and the same here. So, yeah.
I think there's a degree to which, as far as any music that I've ever recorded, until this last one, I had never gone into a studio to record music that we hadn't all played together, and there wasn't some of that rapport already established. And to me, that's important. One of the things that I think, to what Eric was saying, that's very much the case, when whether a band and musicians have been together a long time, especially if they're touring and playing the same material, especially promoting a record and they're playing that same material again and again. As jazz musicians, we get restless because we want to create, and if it's static, you feel like it's the same way, you start losing your mind. Like, I couldn't do a pop music because you gotta play it just like the record, otherwise people get upset. And so if you think about Miles Davis, he had one of his great quintets in the late '60s with Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Tony Williams, and they were playing this music a lot. It's like My Funny Valentine and Green Dolphin Street, and all these tunes that he'd been playing for years. And those guys, I think part of the reason that music just got so fresh and out there, because those guys were young guys and they were trying to create something that would be interesting to them, and they did that harmonically, they did that rhythmically. And for times when I've been able, it's harder, especially these day and age, there's fewer venues and everything to perform, but when I've been able to get tours together and 3, 4, 5 days in a row, and then you start seeing that, like the music starts to really go in different places. And sometimes it's not exactly how I would say this is the way I wanted to be on the recording, but it's a lot of fun when you start exploring it and see it develop in that setting. Yeah. Thank you.
So, what do you think about doing a medley where we play the head of the song?
Well, with 5 minutes, I don't know if we got. I think we might, if you want to shoot heads on each No Souls.
Well, I was thinking on the first one. And then we can
Well, for the first one, yeah, if we got a little leeway, I think we should play the melody down on this one.
yeah, and then go into the next one.
Cool, great. Yeah,
I will take one for the team if the SWAT team comes in. And
there's enough of us in the
room. So thank you so much. I'll let Todd introduce the tunes, but just a couple closing housekeeping things. Thank you for supporting this series, and if you have some extra cash and you want to throw it in the punch bowl, great. If you want to, more importantly than that, if you want to buy some of Todd's music, come see him and or see lovely Roland just pointing out the swag shelf over there. Todd has very generously put forth a suggested $16 per CD, but pay what you can, whether that's more or less, within reason. I mean, within reason with the less part. More part, there's no. And
well, we don't want anyone going home without a copy of the album, so that's why it's flexible like that.
And if you're not already on our mailing list, then please sign up for that on your as well. Yes.
Is it possible that you can make sure that there's a copy in the library so that people can take it out?
Oh, great idea. Pardon me? I guess sometimes that's a good point.
I'll take it out.
And
take a late fee too.
And I will point out that our last event of this year's series will be on Saturday, October 19th, with the great drummer Gerald Cleaver. So please mark your calendar for that. And do you want to set this up?
I do want to set it up, but first I want to say a big, big thank you to Noah for not just having Eric and I today, but for curating this series. Obviously, he's a wonderful pianist, composer, but he also has his nonprofit, Resonant Motion, that does a lot of things. And I think getting to be a chance of this and see this, it kind of inspires me to want to do something similar down home, because it's so important that we have these kind of settings. And so my hat's off to you for all you do. A big shout out to Henry. Like Eric said, this is the first time the four of us have played together, and when you have musicians that take the time to learn this music and just knock it out, it's an honor and a pleasure.
So our security guard has gone home. So if you can exit this exit, that would be most convenient. This exits, you walk down to Court Street and you can go around the corner and get to the front of the library. If you have a problem with that, the library is dark, but you can get through the
Three options of security. Please refrain from mischief for the next 20 minutes.
So the two tunes that we're going to close with are both from the album that we opened up with, my last On These Streets. And as I said, that was a very intentional effort to show the strengths and challenges of our neighborhood. And this composition is called It Still Gets Still, and it's one of the beauties of our neighborhood. I come home, Eric and I oftentimes will come back from a gig late at night, and I love the stillness of Baltimore. There's a train that runs through town, actually underneath my house, and you can hear it like in the distance, whether it's in the distance or closer by. And it makes me think of growing up in New Jersey too, where there was a train through Middletown, and you could hear it because it just gets so quiet and still at night, and you encounter the negative stereotypes and perceptions. That's the beauty and the stillness of our community. So this is called It Still Gets Still, and then we'll go kind of immediately into the last closing tune of the album, which is called New Jersey 88, and it's kind of a joyful, bouncy tune which draws on my roots growing up in New Jersey and having a great childhood and playing ping pong and Miss Pac-Man, and so here's some of that fun. And you know, the last thing I'll say, so CDs are at the back. I'll try to be mine after we hit this, finish the last two, so I can talk with anyone else who wants to ask questions, grab CDs. But also, Ron, if you could hold up the brochure. I did bring a copy of our brochure. Phil left the brochure to the left. Here you go. For my nonprofit, Intersection of Change. And so I would love for you to take a copy of that. For those that feel the hopelessness about challenges, whether it's what we struggle with in Baltimore or so many of our other cities, if you want to see what's possible, I think that you would do well to check out what we as a small dedicated community group have been able to do for our neighborhoods. So the brochure and our work is there as well.
Thank you.